On a crisp spring afternoon, the small town of Willow Creek buzzed with excitement. Families had gathered at the local baseball field for the annual youth tournament, an event everyone looked forward to all year. The air smelled of freshly cut grass and popcorn from the snack stand, while kids ran around laughing, their cheers mixing with the chatter of parents in the bleachers. It was supposed to be a perfect day, until it wasn't. 9-year-old Ethan Parker was the star pitcher for his team, the Willow Wildcats. His dad sat proudly in the stands, camera in hand, ready to capture every moment of what he thought would be another ordinary game. Ethan had been practicing tirelessly for weeks, determined to win this year's championship. He loved baseball more than anything else, and today felt like his chance to shine. The game started off well. Ethan threw fastballs that left batters swinging at thin air, earning loud applause from the crowd. Parents cheered, teammates slapped him on the back, and his coach gave him encouraging nods from the dugout. Everything seemed normal until halftime rolled around. During a quick timeout, Ethan jogged over to the dugout to grab some water from the team cooler. Before heading inside, he turned toward the bleachers and waved at his dad. That wave became the last time anyone saw Ethan. At first, no one noticed he was missing. When the game resumed, players assumed Ethan had gone to use the restroom or maybe stopped to talk to friends. But as minutes ticked by and Ethan still hadn't returned to the mound, people began to worry. One of the coaches called out his name, scanning the field and the surrounding area. A teammate mentioned seeing him near the dugout earlier, but after that, nothing. Panic started to ripple through the group. Parents who were watching the game joined the search, spreading out across the park. Some checked the bathrooms, others peered into nearby woods. Volunteers combed the parking lot, thinking maybe Ethan had wandered off accidentally. Meanwhile, Ethan's dad rushed down from the bleachers, clutching his camera tightly, dread creeping into his chest. "Ethan!" he shouted, his voice trembling. "Where are you?" As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the field, reality hit hard. Ethan was gone. Local law enforcement arrived quickly, setting up a command post near the concession stand. Officers questioned everyone involved, coaches, teammates, even random spectators, but came up empty-handed. The searchlights came on, illuminating the darkening park as officers and volunteers scoured the woods surrounding the field. Dogs sniffed the ground, hoping to pick up a scent, but there was no trace of the boy. By midnight, the once cheerful atmosphere had transformed into something heavy and suffocating. Parents hugged their children close, grateful they were safe, while Ethan's dad paced back and forth, unable to sit still. Every unanswered question gnawed at him. Why hadn't he followed Ethan to the dugout? What if he could have stopped whatever happened? Each second felt like hours, stretching endlessly as hope dwindled. Flyers with Ethan's smiling face soon appeared everywhere, on telephone poles, store windows, and car windshields. Missing was printed boldly above his picture, along with details about the day he disappeared. Neighbors organized candlelight vigils, holding flickering flames aloft as they prayed for Ethan's safe return. Tears flowed freely during these gatherings, reminders of how deeply the community cared for the bright-eyed boy who brought so much joy to those around him. Detectives worked tirelessly, following every lead, no matter how small. They interviewed strangers seen near the park that day, questioned disgruntled ex-coaches, and even looked into rumors about suspicious individuals hanging around town. But despite their efforts, none of the leads panned out. Days turned into weeks, and weeks stretched into months. Slowly, life in Willow Creek began to move forward, though the memory of Ethan lingered like a shadow over the town. For Ethan's dad, however, moving on wasn't an option. Every morning, he woke up wondering if today would be the day he'd hear news about his son. Every night he went to bed replaying the same questions in his mind. How could a child simply vanish without a trace? Who or what had taken Ethan away? And most importantly, was he still alive? Little did anyone know. 9 months later, a discovery would shake the town to its core and bring answers no one expected. As the days turned into weeks, The once vibrant posters with Ethan's smiling face began to fade under the relentless sun and rain. The bold red letters spelling "missing" started to peel at the edges, a cruel mirror of the town's fading hope. Willow Creek, usually buzzing with life, now carried an air of quiet sadness. Conversations that once revolved around weekend plans or school events had shifted. Everyone was talking about Ethan. Neighbors whispered in hushed tones, wondering if they'd missed something, anything, that could have prevented his disappearance. Ethan's dad was a shell of the man he used to be. He barely slept, his mind racing with endless questions and scenarios. Every time the phone rang, his heart leapt, only to sink again when it wasn't news about his son. He replayed that day in his head over and over, the wave, the smile, the way Ethan had jogged toward the dugout. Why hadn't he followed him? Why had he stayed seated, content to snap pictures instead of being present? Guilt weighed heavily on him, heavier than any words could describe. The rest of the family wasn't faring much better. Ethan's older sister tried to stay strong for her dad, but late at night, she'd sit by her bedroom window, staring out into the darkness, hoping against hope that Ethan would come home. Their mom, who lived in another town after the divorce, called daily, her voice trembling with worry. She blamed herself too, thinking maybe things would have been different if Ethan had grown up with both parents together. It was a shared burden, this invisible weight of loss pulling everyone downward. Meanwhile, the community did its best to rally around them. Candlelight vigils became a regular occurrence, drawing crowds of neighbors holding flickering flames aloft. People prayed, cried, and shared stories about Ethan, how he always helped classmates struggling with math, how he never hesitated to share his snacks during lunch, how his laugh could light up a room. These gatherings were meant to offer comfort, but they also served as painful reminders of what was missing. Each story painted a picture of a boy full of kindness and potential, a boy who deserved to be found. Detectives worked tirelessly, following every lead, no matter how small. They interviewed people repeatedly, piecing together fragments of information like a jigsaw puzzle missing half its pieces. Strangers spotted near the park, disgruntled ex-coaches, even rumors about an abusive family friend. All were investigated, thoroughly, but nothing stuck. No credible evidence emerged, leaving the case cold and frustratingly unsolved. Officers promised they wouldn't give up, but their assurances sounded hollow after months of dead ends. As time dragged on, whispers began to circulate about possible suspects. Some pointed fingers at the coach, whose behavior seemed odd in hindsight. Others speculated about a drifter seen wandering the outskirts of town around the same time. There were even wild theories about secret societies or kidnappings orchestrated by someone outside the community. None of these ideas held water, yet they spread like wildfire, fueled by fear and desperation. The lack of answers made people cling to anything that offered a semblance of explanation, no matter how far-fetched. Back at home, Ethan's dad struggled to keep going. Simple tasks like cooking dinner or paying bills felt monumental. His job performance suffered, and his boss suggested taking leave, knowing he needed time to focus on finding his son. Friends stopped by occasionally, bringing casseroles or offering to help clean the house, but their visits only highlighted the emptiness inside. The silence in the house was deafening, especially in Ethan's room where toys and books remained untouched, frozen in time. Despite the growing despair, Ethan's dad refused to give up. He spent hours walking through the park where his son had vanished, retracing Ethan's steps, imagining what might have happened. He talked to anyone who'd listen, desperate for fresh insights. Sometimes strangers approached him, claiming they'd seen Ethan somewhere. A gas station 2 towns over, a bus heading north, a diner late at night. Most of these tips led nowhere, but he followed each one anyway, clinging to the slimmest chance they might be true. 9 long months passed without a single breakthrough. Life in Willow Creek slowly returned to normal, or so it seemed. Kids went back to playing baseball, families resumed their routines, and the Flyers faded further into obscurity. For most, Ethan's absence became a distant memory, a tragedy, tucked away in the recesses of their minds. But for his dad, the pain remained raw, a constant ache that never eased. He marked each passing day on the calendar, counting the months since Ethan disappeared, wondering if he'd ever see his son again. One chilly November evening, as winter approached, Ethan's dad decided to tackle a task he'd been putting off. Cleaning out the garage. Boxes of old sports gear cluttered the space, relics so. Ethan's dad stared at the cooler, his hand hovering over the lid. It was an old, beat-up thing, scratched and dented from years of use on baseball fields. He remembered seeing it in the dugout countless times, filled with icy water bottles and snacks for the kids. But now it felt different. There was something about the way it sat there dusty and forgotten that made him uneasy. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to open it. With a deep breath, he lifted the lid. Inside, instead of empty bottles or leftover wrappers, he found a bundle of crumpled papers tied together with twine. His heart skipped a beat. What was this? Slowly, he untied the string and unfolded the top sheet. The handwriting was shaky, almost frantic, but the message was clear. Dear Mr. Parker, I know where your son is. If you want to see him again, come alone to the old mill tonight at midnight. Tell no one. The words hit him like a punch, too. The gut. Was this real? Or was it some cruel prank designed to toy with his emotions? He read the note again, searching for clues, for anything that might reveal who had written it. But the paper offered no answers, no signature, no explanation, just those chilling instructions. His mind raced. Could this be the break he'd been waiting for? 9 months of sleepless nights, endless searches, and unanswered questions had left him desperate. Yet something about the note didn't sit right. Why would someone leave it in an old cooler? And why wait so long to contact him? Despite his doubts, he couldn't ignore it. This could be his only chance to find Ethan. He glanced at the clock. It was already 9:30 p.m. Midnight wasn't far away, and the old mill was at least 20 minutes outside of town. If he wanted to follow the instructions, he'd have to leave soon. But should he tell someone? The note explicitly said to come alone, but going by himself felt risky. What if it was a trap? What if whoever wrote it meant to harm him? Or worse, Ethan? After pacing the garage for what felt like hours, he made up his mind. He grabbed his jacket, stuffed the note into his pocket, and headed for his car. As he drove toward the mill, his thoughts swirled. Who could have written the note? Was it someone involved in Ethan's disappearance? Or maybe someone who knew something but was too scared to speak out publicly? Every possibility played out in his head, each more terrifying than the last. The old mill loomed ahead as he turned onto the narrow dirt road leading to it. The structure looked even more ominous under the pale light of the moon. Its broken windows stared back like hollow eyes, and the creaking windmill blades added an eerie soundtrack to the scene. Pulling up to the entrance, he parked the car and stepped out, his flashlight trembling in his grip. The air was cold and damp, carrying the faint smell of mildew and decay. He hesitated before stepping inside, his instincts screaming at him to turn back. But the thought of Ethan kept him moving. Forward. Ethan, he whispered under his breath, as if saying his son's name could give him strength. I'm coming. Inside, the mill was dark and silent, save for the occasional groan of the wooden floorboards beneath his feet. Dust particles floated lazily in the beam of his flashlight, casting strange shadows on the walls. Every sound, the rustle of leaves outside, the distant hoot of an owl, made him jump. His pulse quickened with every step deeper into the building. Suddenly, a faint noise caught his attention. It was soft, barely audible, but unmistakable. A whimper. His breath hitched. Was it Ethan? He called out tentatively, Ethan, are you here? The whimper came again, louder this time, accompanied by the shuffle of movement. Heart pounding, he followed the sound, climbing the rickety staircase that led to the second floor. Each step felt heavier than the last, fear and hope battling inside him. When he reached the top, he pushed open a door and froze. There, huddled in the corner, was a figure wrapped in tattered blankets. At first glance, it was hard to tell who or what it was. Then the figure shifted slightly, raising its head. In the dim light of his flashlight, he saw a face he hadn't seen in 9 long months, thin, pale, and visibly terrified, but unmistakably Ethan. "Dad?" Ethan whispered, tears streaming down his face. Relief washed over him like a tidal wave, but it was short-lived. Before he could react, heavy footsteps echoed behind him. Spinning around, he came face to face with none other than the team's former coach. The man stood there holding a crowbar, his expression cold and calculating. "You weren't supposed to find him," the coach growled, advancing slowly. Not yet. Time seemed to stop. All the pieces clicked into place. The odd behavior after Ethan's disappearance, the retirement shortly afterward, the cryptic note leading here. It had been him all along. But why? And how far was he willing to go to keep his secret hidden? Ethan's dad stepped in front of his son, shielding him with his body. His mind raced, trying to think of a way out. They were trapped, outnumbered, and unarmed. Yet one thing was certain: he wouldn't let anyone hurt Ethan, not again. Not ever. The moment the coach stepped forward with the crowbar, Ethan's dad felt a surge of adrenaline rush through him. Fear was still there, gripping his chest like a vice. But something stronger took over: protectiveness. His son was alive, just a few feet away, and no one was going to take that away from him again. Not now, not ever. "You weren't supposed to find him," the coach repeated, his voice low and menacing. He tightened his grip on the crowbar, his eyes darting between Ethan and his dad. "Why couldn't you just leave it alone?" Ethan's dad didn't respond right away. Instead, he shifted slightly, positioning himself squarely between the coach and his son. His hands trembled, but he forced himself to stay calm. If he panicked, things could go south fast. "What are you talking about?" he finally asked, trying to buy time. "Where have you been keeping him all this time?" The coach let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head as if the question amused him. "You think I'm stupid enough to tell you? You already know too much." Ethan clung to his dad's arm, his small frame shaking uncontrollably. His breathing was shallow and tears streamed down his face. It broke his dad's heart to see him like this, so fragile, so scared, but he couldn't afford to lose focus. Not when they were both in danger. "Why did you do it?" his dad pressed, hoping to keep the man talking. Maybe he'd slip up and reveal something useful, or maybe someone would hear them. The old mill wasn't exactly soundproof. "What did Ethan ever do to you?" The coach hesitated for a split second, then sneered. "It wasn't personal. He was special, talented, perfect. I only wanted to help him reach his full potential. People like you wouldn't understand." His words sent chills down Ethan's dad's spine. This wasn't about revenge or greed. It was obsession. The kind of twisted thinking that made people do unimaginable things. He glanced quickly at Ethan, silently urging him to stay quiet and stay close. They had to get out of here, but how? The coach took another step closer, raising the crowbar slightly. "Enough talking," he snapped. "You shouldn't have come here." In that instant, Ethan's dad knew he had to act. There was no way he could overpower the man physically. He was older, weaker, and completely unprepared for a fight. But desperation can make people resourceful. As the coach lunged forward, swinging the crowbar toward him, he ducked instinctively, grabbing the flashlight he'd dropped earlier. With every ounce of strength he had, he swung it upward, catching the coach off guard. The blow connected with the side of the coach's head, sending him stumbling backward. He cursed loudly, clutching his temple where the flashlight had struck. For a brief moment, he looked dazed, giving Ethan's dad the opening he needed. "Run!" he shouted to Ethan, pushing him toward the staircase. "Go! Now!" Ethan hesitated, torn between obeying his dad and staying by his side. But the urgency in his dad's voice left no room for argument. Clutching the railing tightly, he bolted down the rickety stairs, his footsteps echoing through the empty mill. His dad stayed behind, holding the flashlight like a weapon, ready to fend off the coach if he tried to follow. But the coach recovered, faster than expected. Shaking off the pain, he growled and charged again, this time aiming lower to avoid another hit. Ethan's dad barely managed to sidestep, narrowly avoiding the crowbar as it whizzed past his shoulder. The force of the swing caused the coach to stumble, giving him a few precious seconds to think. He scanned the room frantically, looking for anything he could use to defend himself. The beam of his flashlight landed on an old wooden chair lying on its side nearby. Without hesitation, he grabbed one of the legs and yanked it free, using it as a makeshift bat. When the coach came at him again, he swung with everything he had, striking him hard across the arm. The impact made the man drop the crowbar, which clattered loudly against the floor. For a moment, neither of them moved. Both were panting heavily, their faces flushed with exertion. The coach glared at him, hatred burning in his eyes, but he seemed to realize he was outnumbered now. Somewhere below, Ethan had reached the ground floor and was banging on the door, screaming for help. His cries echoed through the mill, loud enough to wake the dead. Relays. As dawn broke over Willow Creek, the town stirred to life with a mix of relief and disbelief. News of Ethan's rescue spread quickly, lighting up phones and filling coffee shop conversations. For 9 long months, people had clung to hope while secretly fearing the worst. Now seeing Ethan alive, thin and shaken but very much alive, felt like a miracle. The sense of relief was palpable, almost electric, as neighbors hugged each other in the streets and parents held their own kids a little tighter. Ethan's dad sat in the hospital waiting room, his body exhausted, but his mind racing. He hadn't slept since the confrontation at the mill, and dark circles under his eyes told the story of sleepless nights and endless worry. But none of that mattered now. His son was safe, wrapped in blankets and surrounded by doctors who were checking him over for any lingering effects from his ordeal. Every so often, a nurse would come out to update him, assuring him that Ethan was doing better than expected. Physically, he'd been malnourished and dehydrated, but emotionally, well, that was another story. When Ethan finally woke up later, that morning, his dad was sitting by his bedside, holding his hand tightly. At first, Ethan didn't say much. His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper, and his eyes darted around the room as if expecting something terrible to happen. "You're okay," his dad kept repeating, tears streaming down his face. "You're safe now." It took time, but Ethan began to open up about what had happened during those 9 months. He spoke haltingly, piecing together fragments of memories that felt surreal even to him. The coach, his former mentor, had lured him away from the dugout on that fateful day, claiming he needed help carrying equipment to his car. Once inside, Ethan remembered feeling dizzy, the world spinning before everything went black. When he woke up, he was in an unfamiliar place, a small windowless room lit only by a single bulb hanging from the ceiling. The coach had kept him hidden, moving him between various locations around town. Sometimes it was an abandoned shed. Other times it was a secluded cabin deep in the woods. Ethan described how the man fed him just enough to survive, insisting he was training him to become the ultimate athlete. "He said I wasn't ready yet," Ethan recalled, his voice trembling, "that I needed more discipline, more focus. He acted like he was helping me, but..." His words trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Hearing this confession shattered Ethan's dad all over again. How could someone so trusted, a man who had coached countless kids, including his own son, turn out to be capable of such cruelty? It wasn't just betrayal, it was madness. The obsession with perfection, the need to control, the twisted logic behind it all, it defied comprehension. And yet, here they were, living through the aftermath of that madness. Meanwhile, law enforcement worked tirelessly to track down the coach. Officers scoured the woods near the old mill, following fresh footprints and traces of blood left behind from the fight. Search dogs sniffed the air, picking up his scent, while helicopters scanned the area from above. By late afternoon, they received a tip-off from a hiker who reported seeing a disheveled man matching the coach's description wandering along a remote trail. Within hours, authorities cornered him, arresting him without incident. During questioning, the coach initially denied everything, sticking to vague explanations about misunderstandings and good intentions. But faced with mounting evidence, including Ethan's first-hand account and the note found in the cooler, he eventually broke down. In a chilling confession, he admitted to kidnapping Ethan, driven by an unhealthy fixation on creating the perfect player. To Him, Ethan represented untapped potential, raw talent waiting to be molded into greatness. The idea of letting anyone else influence or train the boy had become unbearable, leading him to take drastic measures. The revelation shocked the community to its core. Parents who once praised the coach for his dedication and passion now saw him in a completely different light. How had no one noticed the warning signs? Had anyone ever questioned his methods, his intensity, his unwavering focus on winning at all costs? Conversations turned inward, prompting uncomfortable reflections about trust, accountability, and the pressures placed on young athletes. Some wondered if the culture of competition itself had played a role in enabling the coach's behavior. Others vowed to pay closer attention to the adults in their children's lives, ensuring nothing like this could happen again. For Ethan's family, healing would take time. The physical scars might fade, but the emotional wounds ran deep. Ethan struggled with nightmares, waking up in cold sweats and crying out for help. His dad stayed by his side every step of the way, determined to rebuild the bond they'd shared before the nightmare began. Slowly, painfully, they started to find moments of joy again, watching cartoons together, sharing meals, laughing at silly jokes. Each small victory felt monumental, proof that life could still hold beauty despite everything they'd endured. In the weeks that followed, the town rallied around them once more. Neighbors brought meals, teachers offered extra support at school, and friends sent cards filled with messages of love and encouragement. A local therapist specializing in trauma recovery volunteered her services to help Ethan process what he'd been through. Though the journey ahead wouldn't be easy, they weren't alone. Willow Creek stood united, refusing to let darkness define them. And as for the coach, his arrest marked the beginning of legal proceedings that would dominate headlines for months to come. Charged with kidnapping, child endangerment, and multiple counts of assault, he faced a future behind bars. For many, justice couldn't come soon enough. But for Ethan's dad, vengeance wasn't the goal. All he cared about was making sure his son never had to live in fear again. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan's dad stood outside their home, watching his son play catch in the backyard. It was a simple moment, ordinary in every way, and yet, it meant everything. Against all odds, they'd made it through the storm. They were survivors. The trial of the former coach became a media sensation, drawing attention not just from Willow Creek but from across the country. Reporters camped outside the courthouse, microphones in hand, eager to capture every detail of the case. For Ethan's dad, the courtroom felt like a surreal extension of the nightmare they'd lived through. Every day he sat in the front row, his hands gripping the wooden bench so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Beside him, Ethan remained quiet, his face pale and expressionless, as if trying to disappear into himself. Witnesses took the stand, one by one, recounting what they knew, or thought they knew, about the man who had once been a pillar of trust in their community. Former players described how the coach pushed them harder than anyone else, demanding perfection at all costs. Parents talked about his intense demeanor, how he seemed obsessed with winning and grooming the next big star. Even other coaches admitted they'd sometimes questioned his methods but never imagined he was capable of something this extreme. When it came time for Ethan to testify, the room fell silent. The boy walked slowly to the witness stand, his sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. His voice wavered as he spoke, recounting the months he'd spent in hiding, the hunger, the fear, and the constant pressure to meet the coach's impossible standards. At one point he broke down, sobbing uncontrollably, and the judge called for a brief recess. Ethan's dad rushed to his side, wrapping an arm around him and whispering reassurances. "You're brave," he told him softly. So brave." The testimony painted a harrowing picture of manipulation and control. The coach hadn't just taken Ethan away physically, he'd tried to reshape him mentally, convincing him that the outside world didn't care about him anymore. He isolated Ethan, feeding him lies about his family, giving up hope, making him believe there was no life beyond the confines of the coach's twisted vision. It was psychological warfare disguised as mentorship, and hearing it laid bare left many in the courtroom visibly shaken. Finally, after weeks of proceedings, the verdict came: guilty on all charges. The judge delivered a stern sentence, ensuring the coach would spend decades behind bars without parole. As the gavel struck, Ethan's dad let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Justice had been served, at least in the eyes of the law. But as he looked over at Ethan, still fragile and withdrawn, he knew the real work was only beginning. Back home, life began to settle into a new rhythm. Ethan started attending therapy sessions twice a week, meeting with a counselor who specialized in trauma recovery. At first, progress was slow. Nightmares plagued him, waking him up in cold sweats, and loud noises sent him scrambling for cover. Simple tasks like going to school or playing baseball felt overwhelming. But gradually, with patience and support, small victories emerged. One day he laughed, a genuine laugh, while watching cartoons with his dad. Another day he agreed to step onto the baseball field again, even if only to toss a ball back and forth. Ethan's dad threw himself into advocacy work, determined to ensure no other. Months turned into a year, and life in Willow Creek continued to move forward. The scars of Ethan's disappearance were still visible, on the town, on his family, and most of all, on Ethan himself. But with time came healing, slow and steady, like the first rays of sunlight breaking through a storm cloud. For Ethan, every day was a step toward reclaiming the pieces of his childhood that had been stolen from him. And for his dad, every moment spent watching his son laugh or play felt like a gift he'd never take for granted again. Ethan returned to school full-time, though it wasn't easy at first. He struggled to focus during lessons, often zoning out when memories of the mill crept into his mind. Loud noises made him flinch, and crowded hallways left him feeling uneasy. But his teachers were patient, offering extra help whenever he needed it, and his friends rallied around him, including him in games and activities without pushing too hard. Slowly, Ethan began to find his footing again. By spring, he was raising his hand in class, cracking jokes at lunch, and even joining a group project, a small but meaningful sign that he was starting to trust others once more. Baseball, however, remained complicated. The game he had loved so deeply now carried shadows of fear and pain. Standing on the pitcher's mound brought back vivid memories of the last time he'd been there, the day everything changed. For weeks, Ethan avoided the field altogether, opting instead to sit on the sidelines and cheer for his teammates. His dad didn't push him. He knew better than to rush something so delicate. Instead, they started small, one toss at a time in their backyard. At first, Ethan hesitated, gripping the ball tightly as if afraid to let go. But eventually he threw it, weak and wobbly, landing just short of his dad's glove. They both laughed, and for the first time in a long while, baseball felt okay again. By summer, Ethan decided to try playing in a casual league organized by the community center. It wasn't competitive like before. It was just kids having fun, no pressure, no expectations. On his first day back, Ethan stood at second base, his heart pounding as he waited for the batter to hit. When the ball finally sailed into the outfield, he ran as fast as he could, legs pumping, wind rushing past his face. He slid into third base, dust flying everywhere, and looked up to see his teammates cheering for him. That moment, that rush of adrenaline and joy, felt like coming home. The town itself underwent changes too. What had happened to Ethan forced everyone to rethink how they approached safety, especially when it came to children. Parents became more vigilant, asking questions about who was coaching their kids and why certain decisions were being made. Schools introduced mandatory training sessions for volunteers, teaching them how to spot signs of abuse or manipulation. Local organizations set up hotlines where people could report suspicious behavior anonymously. Willow Creek wasn't going to let fear dictate its future, but it also wasn't going to forget the lessons learned. Ethan's dad played a big role in these changes. He traveled to nearby towns, sharing their story and urging communities to prioritize child safety. It's not about distrust, he'd say during talks. It's about awareness. You can't protect your kids if you're not paying attention. His words resonated deeply, sparking conversations that rippled far beyond Willow Creek. People thanked him for speaking out, telling him how his courage inspired them to be better guardians for their own families. At home, Ethan's relationship with his dad grew stronger than ever. They spent evenings talking about anything and everything: school, sports, dreams for the future. Sometimes they'd sit outside under the stars, quiet but content, simply enjoying each other's company. One night, as they roasted marshmallows over a small fire pit, Ethan turned to his dad and said, "I'm glad we're okay now." His dad smiled, ruffling his hair affectionately. "Me too, buddy. Me too." As the years went by, Ethan blossomed into a confident, kind-hearted teenager. He never forgot what had happened, but he refused to let it define him. In high school, he joined the debate team, using his voice to advocate for causes he cared about. He volunteered at the same community center where he'd played casual baseball, mentoring younger kids and encouraging them to chase their dreams. Watching him grow into such a compassionate young man filled his dad with pride and relief. Relief that despite everything, Ethan hadn't lost his ability to love and trust. Every year on the anniversary of Ethan's rescue, the town held a special event called Hope Day. Families gathered at the park for food, music, and games, celebrating resilience and unity. A tree was planted near the dugout, symbolizing new beginnings, and kids wrote messages of gratitude on colorful ribbons tied to its branches. Ethan always attended, standing beside his dad as they watched fireworks light up the night sky. It was a reminder, not just of the darkness they'd endured, but of the strength they'd found together. One evening, years later, Ethan sat on the porch with his dad, reflecting on how far they'd come. "Do you think we'll ever really get over it?" he asked quietly. His dad thought for a moment before answering. "Probably not completely. Some things leave marks, and that's okay. But we don't have to carry them alone. We've got each other, and we've got this whole town behind us. That makes a difference." Ethan nodded, leaning back in his chair. The cicadas chirped in the distance, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the trees. Life wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was good. And for Ethan and his dad, that was enough. As Ethan grew older, the echoes of his past continued to shape him, but not in the way anyone might have expected. Instead of bitterness or anger, he carried a deep sense of purpose, a determination to turn his pain into something meaningful. By the time he reached his late teens, he had become a voice for others who felt silenced, a beacon of hope for kids and families navigating their own struggles. High school was a turning point for Ethan. He joined the student council and started organizing workshops on mental health awareness, encouraging peers to speak openly about their fears and challenges. At first, some students were hesitant, unsure if they could trust the process. But Ethan's honesty broke down barriers. During CU1 assembly, he stood in front of the entire school and shared bits of his story. Not just the kidnapping, but the long road to recovery. "It's okay to feel broken," he told them. "What matters is that you keep trying to put yourself back together, and you don't have to do it alone." His words resonated deeply. Kids began approaching him after assemblies, opening up about their own battles, bullying, anxiety, family issues. Ethan listened without judgment, offering advice when asked and simply being present when words weren't enough. His dad watched with pride as his son transformed from a scared little boy into someone who inspired courage in others. Outside of school, Ethan stayed involved in the community. He worked closely with local organizations to create programs aimed at keeping kids safe. One initiative focused on teaching parents how to recognize signs of distress in their children, while another provided training for coaches and mentors on maintaining healthy boundaries. These efforts earned him recognition beyond Willow Creek. He was invited to speak at conferences and events across the state, sharing insights that came not from textbooks, but from lived experience. For his dad, seeing Ethan thrive was both humbling and healing. The guilt he'd carried for so many years, the relentless what-ifs and self-blame began to loosen its grip. Watching his son stand tall, unafraid to confront the world, reminded him that love and resilience could overcome even the darkest moments. They still talked often about what had happened, but those conversations no longer ended in tears. Instead, they became opportunities to reflect on how far they'd come and how much good they could still do. One summer, Ethan decided to take on a project close to his heart, renovating the old baseball field where his journey had begun. Over the years, the park had fallen into disrepair, its once vibrant green grass overtaken by weeds, its benches splintered and faded. With help from friends, neighbors, and volunteers, Ethan spearheaded an effort to restore it. They painted the dugouts bright blue, replaced the worn-out bases, and planted flowers around the perimeter. On opening day of the newly refurbished field, the town gathered to celebrate. Ethan stood at the pitcher's mound, microphone in hand, addressing the crowd. "This place means a lot to me," he said, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. "It's where I fell in love with baseball, where I dreamed big dreams. But it's also where I learned that life doesn't always go the way we plan. Sometimes bad things happen, and sometimes we have to fight harder than we ever thought possible to find our way back." He paused, looking out at the sea of faces. Parents holding toddlers, teenagers laughing with friends, elderly couples sitting side by side. But here's the thing, we're stronger together. This field isn't just for playing games. It's a reminder that no matter what happens, we can rebuild, we can start over, and we can make something beautiful out of something broken. The applause,